Movie discourse is really funny because sometimes you run into these very specific situations. It doesn't happen a lot where a movie is both overrated and at the same time overhated. And that's exactly what Gladiator 2 is. There are some people on one side who say, oh my God, this is a masterpiece. It's better than the first one. Pedro Pascal and Denzel Washington and Paul Mescal. This cast is phenomenal. The action is, oh my God, it's just so good. And there are others on the other side who are like, this is absolute garbage. I cannot believe they even made this. It's nowhere near as good as the first one. As a matter of fact, everything in this movie sucks. And they've even reached to the point of saying it's the exact same as the first movie. To what I say, what the hell were you watching? You mean the fact that there's gladiators fighting in an arena and there's political warfare going on between the senators and all the other people who are dignitaries in Rome? You mean that? Yeah, both of those are done in this movie, but it's not done in the same way. There's no character in the first movie like Denzel. Not even close. There is no emperor in Gladiator 2 with the same depth that Commodus had, played by Joaquin Phoenix. So no, it's not the same at all, not in the slightest. And when I see all this, I'm like, y'all need to calm down. This is not the worst movie I've ever seen. It's not terrible at all, but it's also not a masterpiece and is nowhere near better than Gladiator 1. This is a good movie. Not a great one. Some days I'm like, oh, it's really good. And other days when I think about it, it's like, it's solid. And a lot of that has to do with me not connecting with the characters as much as I did in the first movie. In Gladiator 1, we had Maximus as our main character, and we had Commodus, who we focused on throughout the entirety of the movie. We focused on the depth of Commodus, his jealousy, his hatred, his wanting of approval from his father. We focused on Maximus, who just wanted to go home after a long, weary war campaign, but it was stripped from him by a jealous Caesar. So throughout the original movie, it felt really focused. Gladiator 2 in a lot of ways feels spread thin, a little unfocused, but that doesn't mean that we don't get to gravitate towards certain characters. The number one character who I gravitated towards was, of course, Denzel Washington's Maximus. He was incredible in this role. He deserves a supporting actor nomination. In the beginning, I was worried that Denzel wouldn't be a part of this movie much, but once he's in the film, he has a consistent presence. Maximus is smart. He's conniving. If this were Game of Thrones, Denzel Washington's Maximus might have won the Game of Thrones. He is actually that good at playing the game. He's always moving other characters like pieces on a chessboard. He's got everyone under his thumb, whether they know it or not. And that's the best part of this film. Watching Denzel's character slowly ascend little by little through the ranks of Rome's government. After I left the theater, me and my friend who was with me had our usual post-movie debrief, and essentially the question came up, if Denzel wasn't in this movie, is this movie any good? And honestly, I don't think that it rises to the level that it does without Denzel. That's not to say that the other performances were bad. Paul Mescal and Pedro Pascal carry the movie with good performances with what little they were given. Paul Mescal plays Lucius, the son of Maximus, which is something I was questioning the entire movie. Later on, when I talked to some friends about it, they said that there were some fan theories saying that Lucius was Maximus' son, and that really just folded it into this story so that we can get the story that we got. Honestly, that felt a little weak to me because there's no indication in the first Gladiator that those two are father and son at all. It does feel like Ridley Scott just pulled that out of his fan theory hat. Either way, there are some great things about this character of Lucius. Even though he doesn't have a lot of depth to him, he is really fun to watch. There's one point in the movie where he's a newly made slave and he's fighting one-on-one with somebody, and there's an angle slam that happens, and I lost my mind. It was crazy to see the angle slam in an actual movie through a table. I think he could play a great Wolverine whenever Hugh Jackman actually decides to hang it up, which might not be a long time because he could be going till you're 90. Lucius's entire motivation is actually to go after Pedro Pascal's character of Acacius, who led the Roman armies to take over where Lucius was staying and essentially slaughtered the entire town and the armies there. Denzel's character promises Lucius Acacius' head in exchange for his loyalty. And Acacius is played well by Pedro Pascal, but I think one of the biggest failings of this movie is the underdevelopment of that character and the underdevelopment of the tension between Lucius and Acacius. For the most part, Acacius is not aware of Lucius at all. So when they finally meet up, the tension is really one-sided, and it kind of dampens the moment where they finally are about to fight. It's like one person doesn't want to fight and the other person does want to fight. We are getting some okay action in this scene. Overall, it felt unsatisfying, especially with the way Acacius' character goes on throughout the rest of the film. The Twin Emperors is a really interesting idea that I didn't think that the movie took advantage of. By no means do I think that these are terrible characters. I just wish we would have explored a little bit more about them. Even though they were twins, I do wish that they had distinct personalities, one being more eccentric and the other one being more subdued, but they're both as evil as they were in this movie. However, the way that they end up, especially with Denzel Washington's character's involvement, it's pretty good. Now let's talk about the action. The Colosseum scenes. These were really well done action sequences. Really was able to capture some of that old Gladiator feel, especially in that scene where there's a rhino involved in the proceedings. That was really fun, that was violent, it was brutal. Shout out to the rhino for really putting up a good performance. But then we move on to the next Colosseum battle with the naval fight. I never would have thought that we would see sharks in the Roman Colosseum. It was so different from anything else that came before it or came after it. If it was longer and allowed to breathe a little bit, I thought that that scene would have been even better than it already is. So do I think this movie is a masterpiece? No, not at all. Do I think it's trash? Absolutely not. I think it's right there in the middle, and I think Denzel lifts it to the middle, because without him, like I said before, I don't know if this movie would have been nearly as enjoyable. The entire film is carried on the back of Denzel's performance. So yeah, it's a little overrated by some and a little overhated by others. So how would I rate this movie? Well, simply, I'm going to give this a good time at the movies. I think you should go out and see it for Denzel's performance alone. So let me know in the comments, have you seen Gladiator 2? What do you think about it in comparison to Gladiator 1? Did you think this movie was a masterpiece? Or do you think that it was absolute trash? Or did you think, like me, that it was good? It was solid. It's okay. Let me know in the comments, and I'll talk to you guys next time.